On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, Jessica finds herself behind bars with Adrienne Balboa from Maude, Eve Plum from the Brady Bunch, Vera Miles from Psycho and Psycho 2, and Margaret Avery from The Color Purple. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner Miss Angela Lansbury. Today I'm going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 9, Jessica Behind Bars. Air date, December 1st, 1985. 1985 was a great year. Around this time, The Color Purple was actually released. This is a very special episode of Murder, She Wrote. It is the only episode in the history of the show that had an all-female guest cast. Meaning there are no male guest stars in the whole episode. Not one single one, which reminds me of the wonderful play, The Women. Just really good. This is also one of the few episodes where we find ourselves in one location. For instance, in the last episode I did called Dead Heat, the main location was the racetrack, but we found ourselves in other locations too. This takes place in the prison, and only in the prison and nowhere else. This is also a very special episode for the podcast, for the Murder, She Wrote podcast. This is my 30th episode, and this is a milestone, just like the 25th episode was a milestone, because this is the most I've stuck with something my whole life. I have ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. Sometimes it's very hard to discipline myself to sit here and record an episode for you guys, but your support has meant the world to me. Your words of encouragement, your comments, your likes, your cares, your loves, everything, especially in the 2 Facebook groups that I joined, All Things Murder, She Wrote, Jessica Fletcher Murder, She Wrote. Your all support is just phenomenal, and without it I wouldn't be able to continue doing this, and I'm in it for the long haul. So thank you so much for your support. I hope everyone had a wonderful Easter, and I get my vaccination on Thursday, so I'm hoping everything goes well with that, and I hope everyone is doing well with their vaccination. And this is one of a really great episode to have a 30th episode on Jessica Behind Bars, because it's just one of those rare episodes where the who's who of 80s television is in it, and 80s cinema. And I can't wait to get into the guest stars at the end, because Adrienne Balboa makes the first of several appearances on Murder, She Wrote, and I don't know if any of the rest of them appear in any other episodes, but it would be nice if they did, because the show's on for 12 years, so I mean, they're bound to have the same guest star come back more than once. They've already done that with John Austin, who's played the realtor Harry. I think he's in the next episode, which is set in Cabot Cove, which I can't wait for that one. So as always, if you're new to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, I spoil everything there's to spoil about the episode. Who the murderer is, what his or her, well in this case her motivation is for killing the person. You can't do a Murder, She Wrote podcast without doing that. So if you haven't seen this episode, go watch it. It's a phenomenal episode. You won't regret it. If you have, sit back, relax, enjoy yourself, and let's see if we notice the same things. Because here we go. We start off this episode at the Women's Correctional Facility in South Carolina, and we never leave until the episode ends. Jessica arrives at the prison and goes up to the gate as a truck is arriving. The guard tells Mrs. Fletcher to wait, and she goes and inspects the truck, which is empty. And then she lets Mrs. Fletcher in and tells Mrs. Fletcher she must go through the metal detector. We get introduced to the person who is driving the truck, Mrs. Nims, who is really upset about the fact that there's a new guard. And she says, "Don't worry, I've taken care of her," and they go inside. Some other woman says, "Don't worry, I took care of her." We'll find out who she is a little bit later. So we then get introduced to Warden Elizabeth Gates, played by Vera Miles from Psycho and Psycho 2. She is practicing a speech where she has hired a registered nurse, and I guess she's about to tell everyone that she's done it, and suddenly her warden, Amanda Debs, comes in and says, "Jessica Fletcher's here, but there's nobody to greet her." So the warden goes, and then Debs says, "Dr. Matthews is about to leave," and she says, "No, have them detain her." So we then cut to sort of a lobby, because there's like a desk, and there's another gate that's sort of shut down, and Dr. Matthews, played by Janet McLonigan, I probably did not say that right, is standing in front of it, and she goes, "This is not fair. I'm not one of the prisoners. I don't understand this. Why am I here?" And she says, "Sorry, warden's orders." The elevator doors open, and Mary, our main protagonist, comes down. It's her job to escort Mrs. Fletcher to the classroom. Mrs. Fletcher then comes through, or Mary talks to Dr. Matthews and says that her friend Susie is sick in the infirmary and really needs some medicine. Dr. Matthews basically shuts down the conversation and says, "You don't tell me how to treat my patients." Mrs. Fletcher then comes to the gate. They let her in. Warden Gates and Assistant Warden Debs comes through the elevator, and they introduce themselves to Mrs. Fletcher, and we find out why Mrs. Fletcher is there. Apparently her friend Margaret was really, really sick, and she has come to take over her creative writing class. She meets Dr. Matthews, and the warden and Dr. Matthews have a very heated discussion. Right there in front of Mrs. Fletcher, and it's very awkward. The warden introduces Dr. Matthews and says that Dr. Matthews is in charge of all the prison, is the prison doctor and is in charge of all things medical in the prison. And she says, "But I have recently got the backing to hire a registered nurse, so the pressure will have to be taken off of Dr. Matthews." And Dr. Matthews says, "Perhaps the attention will also be taken off of you, warden." And she says, "Perhaps we need to talk about that pressure in my office now." So they then go off screen, as well as Debs, and Mary takes Mrs. Fletcher to the classroom, because it is apparently her job to do so. So as they're walking, Mrs. Fletcher says that she rather enjoyed Mary's story, and said that she could be a writer. Mary said, well, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I think it's too late. And Mrs. Fletcher says, oh, it's never too late. I'm living proof of that. And she said, well, you don't have to go up against a parole board. And Mrs. Fletcher said, oh, I'm sure it's not that bad. What are you in for? And she says, I killed my husband. They then go in the classroom. We then cut to a prisoner mopping outside of the Warden Gates office as Dr. Matthews and Warden Gates argue. Apparently, Dr. Matthews has filed a report on Reverend Warden Gates, and she thinks that Dr. Matthews is after her job, and Dr. Matthews says that she's crazy and runs out of the office. Assistant Warden Debs tries to basically diffuse the situation, but to no avail. We cut to the classroom. Mrs. Fletcher is talking about the perfect crime, and she says that everybody's stories was very, very interesting. At one point, one prisoner turns to another prisoner and says, do you know who that is? And she goes, who cares? She talks about one prisoner's story, Tug, played by Eve Plum, who you'll see in the visual aid collage I made for this particular episode in the left-hand corner. She says, it was quite interesting how the getaway car crashed right into the police car. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't creative. That's actually how it happened. And everyone started laughing. And she said, hey, if I knew it had a stick shift, I wouldn't have stolen it. And she says, there was a particular story that I absolutely loved, and that was Mary Sherman's story. But Mary is not there. She's gone to the infirmary, snuck to the infirmary to see her friend Susie. And when Susie says she's in a lot of pain, she says, don't worry, I will go get you some medicine. She goes to Dr. Matthews' office, uses a fork, I guess she kept from dinner, and opens a drawer and gets a key marked pharmacy. Meanwhile, we cut to Dr. Matthews and Assistant Warden Debs having an argument. Most took place off screen, and she says, we can work this thing out, and Dr. Matthews goes running down the corridor. Mary is about to go into the pharmacy to get some medicine for her friend when she hears Dr. Matthews coming. She quickly runs back into Dr. Matthews' office, sticks the key back in her desk, runs back into the examination room, and hides in one of the rooms when Dr. Matthews comes in. A woman guard is walking down the corridor. I think her name is Miss Spangler. And she overhears typing. She knocks on Dr. Matthews' door, and suddenly the alarm goes off, and it sounds like a weird dog barking. To me it did. And everyone comes running to Dr. Matthews' office, and the warden opens the door, which the guard hears, and we, the audience, hear what appears to be some sort of struggle. And then the warden comes with a key, opens the door, and Dr. Matthews is dead next to a vial of medicine in her office on the floor. When the warden has the guards check the offices, Mary tries to run and is caught. And in the warden's eyes, red-handed. One of the guards comes to get Mrs. Fletcher, and the prisoners, led by Caitlin, played by Adrienne Balboa, wants to know what's going on. Another prisoner, Dixie, played by Margaret Avery from The Color Purple, says that the doctor has been murdered and they think that it was Mary. The prisoners then decide to riot, led by Caitlin, and they all end up in the library with another prisoner named Louise, played by Susan Oliver. They take over the prison and they talk to the lieutenant governor, who is also a woman and sounds like Barbara Babcock's voice, who's guest starred in season 1 of Murder, She Wrote, and will make several appearances throughout the run of the show, even going as far as to having a role on the failed spinoff, The Law and Harry McGraw. But I can't be sure it's her voice. It kind of sounds like her, but I don't think she was credited. They basically say that they have taken over the prison and they want to solve the crime because they don't want Mary to go down for it. And Louise says, "Everybody, won't you listen to me? We need somebody who the cops will trust, someone who knows how a killer thinks. We have that person right here, Mrs. Fletcher." Mrs. Fletcher does her usual, "Oh, I'm not going to do it. Oh, it's just not." And then she goes, "Okay, but can I have your word that whoever the murderer turns out to be, that they will be turned over to the police, no questions asked?" Everyone agrees except for Caitlin, who just nods her head. So they go to Dr. Matthews' office, and Mrs. Fletcher examines Dr. Matthews and comes up with that she died of a lethal overdose of whatever is in the vial. Mary says that she came in to... She doesn't admit right away that she was taking medicine. She admits that later. But she says that she had come in to see if she could help Susie in the infirmary, and she heard typing, which was strange because she never used her typewriter. And Mrs. Fletcher asked the warden, Gates, what she thought happened. And this, oh my god, everyone, this is a wonderful scene. Absolutely wonderful. Sorry about that. My phone was ringing. The warranty on my car has expired. Only here's the funny thing. I don't have a car, and I don't even have a driver's license. Anyway, let's get back into the episode here. So Mrs. Fletcher convinces everyone to send the vial off for fingerprints. Of course, Caitlin is opposed to this because they would find Mary's fingerprints on it, because Mary claims that she picked up the vial and to see if she could help her. But when Mrs. Fletcher asks the warden how she thinks it happened, Vera Miles is a fantastic actress and does not get the credit she deserves. This wonderful scene is so Emmy-worthy. When Mary mentions that that Dr. Matthews was typing on her typewriter, and they don't find anything in the typewriter, Warden Gates suggests maybe she filed it. Then she goes over and she says, and that's how it happened. Mary was stealing medicine from the doctor's pharmacy supply, and she knew she would get caught. The doc came back too early for Mary to finish, so Mary took the syringe and she plunged it into the back of Dr. Matthews. Dr. Matthews fell, knocking her papers down. She went to grab for the alarm to signal for help, but instead she hit the alarm that locks down the prison. Then, as she writhed in pain, Mary took the syringe and plunged it into Dr. Matthews again and again and again, and she drove the syringe home until she was dead. Everyone in the room has literally no idea what to say or think, and their facial expressions say it all. I tried so hard to get like some screenshots of this scene, but I got sucked in every single time, so I just couldn't. It's that good. So then Mrs. Fletcher, after this, has nothing to say about that. She basically says, one thing's been bothering me. How did the cook get to Dr. Matthews' office so fast? And they say, well, she couldn't have come directly from the kitchen. She had to come back up from the bathroom, from the basement stairs. So they go into the kitchen, and the cook, whose name happens to be Cookie, which also was the name of the character in the last episode I did, Dead Heat, who worked in a stable. But she's a cook, so her name is Cookie. Basically, she's making something for dinner for the next night, and Dixie goes up to it and goes, my daddy wouldn't feed this to his hogs. And they eat slop, but they sure wouldn't eat this. And Mrs. Fletcher decides to taste it for herself and says that the vegetables have spoiled and that she just needs to give it a proper burial because it's not fit for human consumption. So the prisoners go down and find Mrs. Nims hiding in the basement. Cookie says that she didn't want Mrs. Nims to get hurt, that she was here to drop off a delivery, but the truck was empty. Mrs. Fletcher looks outside as a bunch of extras are grabbing a bunch of stuff out of what was supposed to be an empty truck and building a barricade so that they can shoot at the cops if they decide to come in. Caitlin then says, you know what? I know who the murderer is. Mrs. Fletcher is just too proud to say it. If the murderer wasn't in the office, then it had to be someone outside the office. And there's only one person that has a master key to where she can go anywhere she wants, and that's Warden Gates. And everybody knows that Warden Gates didn't like Dr. Matthews, so she's the one that killed her. And she says, no. Mrs. Fletcher says no. She says, well, Jamie was on mop duty tonight. Find her, and we'll have a makeshift trial in the library. And that's exactly what happens. Jamie comes in. That was the woman that was doing the mop. Jamie comes in and she says that she overheard Dr. Matthews and Warden Gates yelling at each other, and that she said that she was going to get even with her. And she claims that she left her office long before the alarm went off, so she can't account for where she was. Caitlin says, let's use her as a shield and blast our way out of here. And Mrs. Fletcher says, you made a deal with me. And she says, no, I did not. And she said, yes, just give me more time. Suddenly the phone rings and the lieutenant governor is calling, and she says, one set of fingerprints was Mary's like they suspected, but they found another set of fingerprints on the vial that doesn't belong to the doctor or anyone on file at the prison, meaning they are in danger. Somebody is there that should not be there. Once Mrs. Fletcher relays this information, everyone's like, well, who would hide out in a prison just to kill the doctor? And then Mrs. Fletcher says, Nims, we must get to Nims. As her and Bertha, another prisoner, is running to get to Nims, who I guess is in the classroom. The lights go out, someone screams, and as they go into the classroom, Mrs. Nims is found with a knife plunged in her back. Mary and the warden are also in the room. Mrs. Fletcher asks Mary what happened, and Mary says, "I came in here to be with the rest of the hostages to see if they were okay, when suddenly the lights went out and I heard somebody scream. And then when the lights came on, Mrs. Nims was dead." And the warden says, "Did you really come to see if we were all right, Mary? Or did you plunge that knife into Mrs. Nims' back, thinking that you mistaking her for me?" I don't really know why the warden thinks that Mary is guilty for one thing and for another. Why she thinks Mary is trying to kill her. Mary says that she didn't kill anyone and runs out the door in frustration. The warden, Caitlin comes in and says the cops are playing us, and then she sees that Nemesis dies and she goes, "Where'd you get the knife, warden?" And so Mrs. Fletcher follows Mary to the infirmary and says, "If I'm going to figure this thing out, you need to tell me the truth right now." And Susie says, "Tell her, please. They can't do anything to us anymore now." The doctor forced Mary to type up her reports, knowing that she would not understand, in exchange for a key. Mary's been using it to steal medicine from the doctor's pharmacy to basically help the patients. And according to the lieutenant governor, the medicine was diluted, meaning not a lot of the medicine was in there. And that's why the prisoners had been so sick. Mary also explains that the reason why she's in prison is because her husband was very abusive, and he had hit her like 3 or 4 times, had her in intensive care at the hospital, and she heard from one of her friends that he was drunk, so she armed herself with her husband's shotgun, and he came home and she shot him before he could hurt her. The police say that it wasn't self-defense because she was armed and he was not. So, there you go. Suddenly, Louise burst into the infirmary and says Caitlin has figured it all out and she doesn't like how she says it. Basically, Caitlin has rallied a bunch of people in the hallway, including Dixie. Bertha and Louise are on Mary and Jessica's side to stop the violence. Caitlin is ready to shoot their way out of there to basically take whatever happens, because since they're already in prison, they will be probably framed for this murder, on top of whatever most of them are there for, which we don't know what all their crimes are. We don't know why Caitlin's there, why Dixie, Bertha. We know why Tug is there for armed robbery, and we know why Mary is there for murder, but we don't know why the rest of them are. They never explain it. But Caitlin basically has everyone convinced that the murders are going to be pinned on them anyway, so they might as well just shoot their way out. And Mrs. Fletcher says no. And also, Caitlin says that it had to be the top brass had to be in on this, so they can't trust anyone. Mrs. Fletcher says, "Give me more time, I'm going to solve this thing." She then asks to see the warden Gates by herself. She says, "I've been defending you all night, and perhaps maybe I shouldn't. Tell me where you were before all this went down." She said, "It won't help." She said, "You need to tell me." Assistant Warden Deb says that Dr. Matthews put Warden Gates on report because, due to the strain of trying to make improvements on the prison, Warden Gates has been having fainting spells, and Dr. Matthews decided to report her to the board, and she's also trying to run for the Senate, and so that would ruin her. That's true. And then Assistant Warden Debs leaves, and then Warden Gates, tells Mrs. Fletcher that she went to go talk to Louise because Louise has been there for a while and knows what's going on, because she can't figure out why her changes are not going through to the board and why they're such opposed to what's going on. She's only been warden at the prison for 6 months, and she has no idea what's been going on while she wasn't warden. So Mrs. Fletcher says she needs Bertha and Louise to go and get the fingerprints off of Dr. Matthews' body, and she needs to talk to the lieutenant governor one more time. And suddenly, as she's talking to the lieutenant governor, Mrs. Fletcher has an epiphany and realizes she knows who the murderer is. Louise and Bertha come back with Dr. Matthews' fingerprints, and everyone gathers into the room. Caitlin rips the phone out of the wall and says that it's time to go, and everyone needs to get up and follow her. Mrs. Fletcher says she's not doing it. She doesn't care what she says. She knows who the murderer is. She says she has Assistant Warden Debs get Dr. Matthews' file out of her filing cabinet, and she looks at the 2 fingerprints and they don't match. Assistant Warden Debs says she doesn't have time to make sure all fingerprint records are correct, and Caitlin says, "Don't you realize what she just did? She pinned the murder back on Mary." And she says, "Oh no, I didn't. This proves that Mary did not do it, because the fingerprints on the vial is of... I don't suspect that Dr. Matthews was a real doctor." And Mary says, "That seems true, because she didn't seem to know what she was doing, and that's why the patients were always in pain." So they go back to the clinic, and it turns out, spoilers, Dr. Matthews was killed by none other than Dr. Matthews. She committed suicide. According to Mrs. Fletcher, everyone was distracted by Dr. Matthews' body that they didn't see the suicide note, which is why she was typing, and she was bound and determined to kill herself. Mrs. Fletcher also figures out that the registered nurse is what pretty much did it for her, and she was bound and determined to kill herself, so she hit the alarm so she wouldn't be interrupted. The struggle that we, the audience, heard, as well as the guard, Miss Sprangler, was her reacting to the fatal dose of medicine she gave herself, which apparently killed her right away. And I don't know what medicine was in there. I don't remember them saying. So it wasn't Mary, it wasn't Warden Gates. So suddenly Caitlin wants to leave and go and tell the cops Mrs. Fletcher solved it and everything is fine. But Mrs. Fletcher says don't let them go. She says Cookie has been selling off the food supply, Dr. Matthews was selling off her medical supply, and Caitlin was right about someone being on the inside doing everything. And she basically tells Warden Gates that it's none other than her assistant, Amanda Debs. And Cookie killed Mrs. Nems in the dark because she was conspiring with Miss Debs, and it turns out that Caitlin was in on it too. Apparently the plan was they were all supposed to escape that night in the truck that Nems had brought with her. Unfortunately, due to Dr. Matthews pressing the silent alarm, it locked them all in and they couldn't escape. So Bertha, Dixie, and Louise all fight Caitlin and Pug too for the gun, and they end up risking their lives for Warden Gates and their friend Mary. And it's all solved. Oh, the suicide note was taken by Debs to make it look like murder, to take the heat off of her. Um, so that's where it ends. And the warden promises that there will be no retrials or any crimes added to their sentences. And both Mrs. Fletcher and the warden intend to show up at Mary's hearing to make sure that she gets released. And that's the end of the episode. So many wonderful twists and turns, great acting by all the guest stars, which we're going to get into right now. And I can't wait. I hope some of them come back for other episodes in Murder, She Wrote. Alright, let's start with Margaret Avery, who played Dixie, who I know who played Shug Avery in The Color Purple with Whoopi Goldberg. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. I absolutely love it. She is known for, as I said, The Color Purple, Maximum Force, Being Mary Jane, and Blueberry Hill. She is in post-production of a movie called We Are Gathered Here Today. She guest starred on Grey's Anatomy, The Librarians, Meet the Browns, Jag, Walker, Texas Ranger, the original MacGyver, Cosby Show, Miami Vice. This is unfortunately her only episode of Murder, She Wrote, which is sad because she's a good actress. She did a very good job in The Color Purple. She guest starred in Sanford and Son, Kojak, The Night Stalker, An Eye for an Eye. Maximum Force was a Clint Eastwood movie, so that's pretty cool. Adrienne Balboa played the role of Caitlin, and I know that she makes several more appearances on Murder, She Wrote because I remember seeing her in a handful of other episodes. She's known for Escape from New York, Creepshow, The Fog, and Ergo. She's been in 154 different things. She's in a post-production for a movie called The Pitchfork and Hell Blazers. She did some voiceover work for Curious George, Go West, Go Wild last year. And she was in Creepshow TV series in 2019. She was in the show Revenge. She's done a lot of television and a lot of other things. She was in Criminal Minds. Love that show. She was on General Hospital in 2010. CSI New York. The Dog Who Saved Christmas. That's a good one. Grey's Anatomy. She did some voiceover work in one of my favorite video games, Batman Arkham Asylum. Cold Case. Christmas Do-Over. Batman Beyond. And she also played the original Rizzo on Broadway. She also was in Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island, one of my favorite Scooby-Doo movies. The new Batman Adventures, Batman the Animated Series, where she played Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman. Love that. Oh, well, she'll only appear in one more other episode of Murder, She Wrote. I thought she was in a handful of others. Oh well, but I love her. She's a wonderful actress. Never gets the recognition she deserves. Barbara Baxley played the role of Assistant Warden Debs, who was conspiring against Warden Gates. She passed away in 1990 at the age of 67. She was known for The Exorcist 3, Sea of Love, Nashville, the movie, and No Way to Treat a Lady. Her last known credit is The Exorcist 3. Yee. She guest starred on The Twilight Zone, Hotel, American Playhouse, the original Hawaii Five-O, The Rookies, Love American Style, Marcus Webby MD, The Fugitive, another Twilight Zone. Oh, the first Twilight Zone was the one from the 80s. The other one is the original. Alfred Hitchcock Presents in several episodes in that. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She had a long career. Good for her. She was really good in this episode. Really, really wonderful. Yetta DiCarlo played one of the guards, Miss Spangler. And I think I recognize her name. Yes, she was in the Ten Commandments. She died in 2007 at the age of 84. She was known for the Ten Commandments, Dangerous Girl, The Munsters as Lily Munster. I didn't even realize it. Wow. And Crisscross. She played Moses' mother in the opening of the Ten Commandments, and Lily Munster, the mom, on the Munsters. Her last known credit was The Barefoot Executive TV movie in 1995, and then reprising her role from the Munsters in Here Come the Munsters. She was in the movie The Naked Truth, Tales from the Crypt, Fantasy Island. They never show Fantasy Island on TV anymore. I wish they would. The Virginian, a Western. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. So sad. She could have been in more things. She looks so different in this episode that I almost didn't recognize her. But yep, she had a really long career. We miss her as Mrs. Munster. Linda Casey played the role of Mary. She is still alive, and she is known for Lou Grant, spinoff from The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Day by Day, Madlock, and Eleanor and Franklin. I think that's a movie. Her last known credit is from 2010, The Egg Timer. She got started in Touched by an Angel. Oh, and she will appear in... Oh, she appeared in Capital Offense. I knew the name sounded familiar, but she didn't look familiar. She looked different in this episode, and she'll appear in one more episode of Murder, She Wrote after this. So we'll get to her credentials when we get to that episode. Janet McLaughlin played the role of Dr. Matthews, our first murder victim. Well, suicide victim. She died in 2010 at the age of 77. She is known for The 13th Floor, Sounder, Tightrope, and Tick, Tick, Tick. Her last known credit is a movie in 2003 called Blacklisted. She guest starred on the Family Law, which had Dixie Carter from Designing Women, really good show. Days of Our Lives as Nurse Rose, Murder 1, Home Improvement, NYPD Blue, ER, In the Heat of the Night, and she'll appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote. So we'll go over more of her credentials when we get to that episode. Vera Miles played Warden Gates. And like I said, phenomenal actress. Underrated. She's still alive. She's known for Psycho, The Man Who Shot Liberty Vance, The Searchers, and The Wrong Man. Her last credit is something called Separate Lives, and she'll appear in 2 other episodes of Murder, She Wrote. Yes! So we'll go over more of her credentials when we get to those. I can't wait to see what characters she plays, because like I said, she's a phenomenal actress. And she was in Psycho and Psycho 2. She played Janet Leigh's sister. Susan Oliver played the role of Louise, who was in charge of the library. She passed away in 1990 at the age of 58. She's known for Star Trek, the original series, Battlefield 8, Ginger in the Morning, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Her last known credit is Freddy's Nightmares as a maid. She was a nurse in Armed Response. I knew she looked familiar, but I couldn't remember. But yep, she was in 2 episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and she played Laura Horton number 3 on Days of Our Lives. And Night Gallery, that was a good show. Love American Style, The Virginian, Peyton Place, soap opera. So she had quite the career. May you rest in peace, Miss Susan Oliver. Eve Plum, of course, played Tug. And I just recently saw her in Grease Live, which is on Paramount Plus. She is, of course, still alive. She's known for The Brady Bunch, Blue Bloods, Casting, and Blue Ruin, sorry. Her last known credit is last year in the television series Bull. She guest starred on Blue Bloods. She was on Grease Live, just like I said. Law and Order Special Victims Unit. Days of Our Lives. Kenan and Kel, That 70s Show. Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. The Bradys. A Very Brady Christmas. The Facts of Life as Meg. Oh, I think this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Yeah, oh, that's so sad. She should have been in more things. I mean, she is a really good actress that most people do not give her credit for. She struggled a lot with the Brady Bunch, trying to star in things that went against type, and she played a prostitute in a really awesome TV movie called Dawn, Portrait of a Runaway, and she also apparently played a prostitute with Alison Armgrim from Little House on the Prairie on Fantasy Island. Bertha was played by Susan Perez. She died in 2004 at the age of 64. She's known for Dog Day Afternoon, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, Loose Cannons, and Babes. Her last known credit is Break a Leg as an acting teacher. She guest starred on My Wife and Kids, ER, Married with Children. She was in a television series called Babes. I think it was a sitcom with Fran Dresser. She guest starred in Cadney and Lacey, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Oh, this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was so good in this episode. So she had a long, really career, and she was really great in this episode. Jamie was played by Donna Palladini. She's still alive. She's known for The Backup Plan, The Negotiator, Third Rock from the Sun, and Love Boat. Her last known credit is Shark Skin. She was on Days of Our Lives, the TV series Las Vegas, Will and Grace, Becker, NYPD Blue, Judging Amy, Third Rock from the Sun, Boy Meets World, Caroline in the City, Mad About You, ER, Empty Nest, Sister Sister, Doogie Howser, MD. She was also on that sitcom I mentioned, Babes. So she is in common with Bertha. Murphy Brown, Head of the Class, Night Court, awesome show. Jumping Jack Flash. And Elizabeth Arden? Huh. I didn't recognize her. And this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Who's the Boss? Laverne and Shirley, Trapper John MD, Bad News Braves. Happy Days. So yeah, awesome. She's had quite the career. And our murder victim, Mrs. Nims, was played by Darlene Conley. She died in 2007 at the age of 72. She's known for The Bold and Beautiful, Faces, and General Hospital. Her last known credit is The Bold and Beautiful. She played Sally Spader. I wasn't watching it then, so I don't know. She was on General Hospital as Trixie in the 1980s. She guest starred on Highway to Heaven, The Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Young and the Restless. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was on Days of Our Lives. She played a warden. Ironic, isn't it? She was on Little House on the Prairie, A Wiser Heart. And she did the voice of Mrs. Santa Claus for Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. Awesome. And on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, in the episode Will Mary Richards Go to Jail? Haven't seen that one. Bill Cosby Show. Oh, and she was in The Birds as a waitress, but she was uncredited. So I'll have to look and see if I recognize her, because I just got that on DVD. Alright, that's all our guest stars. Thank you so much again for your support of the podcast, and I promise I'm going to try to get more episodes out. Thank you so much for listening and enjoying. I'll see you in the next one where we find ourselves in Cabot Cove again. Happy crime solving, and stay safe out there, everybody.